Everybody, welcome back to the Chad and Sam Show. I'm Sam Mullen here with Chad Trent, and we're getting ready to break down some baseball. It's Chad's favorite time of the year. He cannot get enough of baseball, and we are ready to dive into it with spring training well onto the horizon. Chad, what do we have to start with today?
Well, first off, baseball is pumping through my veins. I've been counting down. I count down baseball after the last game of the World Series. I start counting down. I am one of those spring training aficionados. I do go to the games. I watch them. But what we're starting off in the AL East today. Specifically for right now, we're going to start off with Toronto Blue Jays, coming off a season 74-88, finishing last in the AL East. Kind of rough season, but they're going to be an interesting team to watch. They haven't really done anything big to help them, but they haven't really done anything to hurt them in any major ways. It's a matter of what production can they get out of what they have.
Well, we saw one thing that they did last year is they made a huge offseason move in the trade with the Miami Marlins. Then at that point, Miami Marlins, they had just made that name change, picking up Josh Johnson, Jose Reyes, Emilio Bonifacio. You can fill in the names I'm missing. Point is, they made a huge move in that right there, and it didn't pan out. Like, these guys just did not put up the production that the Blue Jays were looking for, and I think that becomes that big if factor. Can a guy like Jose Reyes lead off for them and bat 310, 315, and score over 100 runs this season? Can you get production out of these other guys? Because, I mean, one of their big losses this year really is that Josh Johnson. He didn't have a great year for him. Not a year you would expect out of a guy who should be an ace on most teams, and he's now with the San Diego Padres. But he's still a leader in this clubhouse. He's still a fantastic pitcher when healthy.
And going back, like staying with Josh Johnson, I feel that that's going to be someone that they're going to wish they decide to keep. I think that they could have gotten him on a cheap deal like Padres got him on. He still has something left. I don't think there's a lot, like 5-6 years left of great season production, but I still think there's something left. But when you look at their subtractions, the people that they've lost recently, you look at J.P. Arencibia, their catcher. You look at Emilio Bonifacio, Josh Johnson, like we talked about. You have John Buck at catcher, and Rajai Davis. There's some people who you look at and you're like, you know what? Maybe their presence won't be as missed. Their presence wasn't as felt, possibly.
And I think one of those guys is John Buck. He did move on to the Mets early last season, so that is a guy that they didn't see a lot of. But I do agree, having a guy like J.P. Arencibia, who was behind the plate for him nearly every game last year, not having him around, and at this point you may be looking at a platoon job, much like as we see the Reds were able to do this past year.
Exactly.
If they are able to get production from Josh, is it Tolley or Toll? Not too much of an importance. And Deanna Navarro, looking at those two guys, can they put together enough hitting to anchor this lineup, or at least be strong enough defensively and work well enough with these pitchers that they don't need to have big offensive production?
And the thing with J.P. Arencibia, I think a huge reason why they let him go is he doesn't have the average. He hits 221 or whatever. He has the power. And the person that oddly he reminds me of is a former teammate of his in Edwin Encarnacion. He showed the power, but a respectable average was never there when he was with the Reds. Now he came to Toronto and he's shown life of a career. He's never going to hit 290 or above 300, but he hits respectable averages that keep security in his job.
Not to mention the 30 to 40 home runs that he's able to hit. That usually helps as well.
That helps too.
I think, as we've discussed, one of the things that we really want to watch with the Toronto Blue Jays this year, among many things, looking at R.A. Dickey, is his age going to catch up to him once again? Is he just old, was it just a tough year for him? The knuckleball is a tough pitch to make as your main pitch. A lot of players have not succeeded in using it. But, R.A. Dickey, he won a Cy Young 2 years ago. That doesn't mean that he's going to have a great year. Doesn't mean he's going to have a horrible year. It's a big question mark for this team.
And you wonder, especially when you have age coming into the picture, it's tough because you don't want to assume too much and say, hey, you're getting old. We don't think you're able to produce like you used to. Because, he's proven to be an exception. To put up the season that he had a couple years ago at the age he was, you don't see that often. And like you said, having a knuckleball as your main pitch, that helps you to an extent. It's prolonged his career by all means. And for older pitchers, also another route they can go. Some pitchers are in favor, some are not. Put them in the bullpen. That gets them their career longer because they're not doing the innings. As they're not having the 5 to 6, 7 innings. They're 1 inning, depending on who your pitching coach is, 1 out. So
I see what you're saying. Kind of wrap up this at least piece on R.A. Dickey is the fact that, and this is something that you talked a lot about with like Aroldis Chapman. Is how much money do you want to pay a guy to be a set-up man? How much money do you want to pay a guy to be a middle reliever? And the fact is, R.A. Dickey's getting paid a lot of money, and it just does not necessarily seem worth it to have this money invested if you're not going to make him a starter or a closer. Right. And I don't see, if he can't succeed as a starter, I don't expect to see him as a closer. So that becomes that big, what do you do with him at that point? Moving on to our other big question, let's look at Jose Bautista. Can he stay healthy?
See, that's going to make or break the Blue Jays season because their offense, he's the core of it. Everything goes around it. If he's out, I hate saying this, but I don't give the Blue Jays as great of a chance to win, especially with the players that they've lost. Because not only you had other solid, respectable players that they lost over this past offseason that helped Bautista, like JPR and Sebia. Yeah, he didn't hit for average, but he still hit 21 homers or so with 77 or so RBIs. That's still respectable. That is still a good output. But they're losing that output. And I don't feel that they're bringing in anyone who is going to have anywhere as great of seasons as that. Deontay Navarro, he had a great stint with the Reds. He did well. But he's not starting material anymore. He's not going to put up those great catcher numbers that you want to look for.
In the end, I think we can both agree the only guy that seems to be helping Bautista offensively is Edwin Encarnacion. And like we already talked about, he doesn't hit for average. Adam Lind, he had a good season or two where he was putting up actually really good numbers, but he really hasn't followed that up. I think he had a 30 home run season a couple of years ago, but hasn't really put up much since then. And then you look at Jose Bautista, we know what he can do when he's healthy. He had, I believe it was 54 home runs 3 years ago. If he can do that again, this team is on the map. You can't rule them out from contention in a division where we have a lot of question marks. If Jose Bautista is healthy, this is a team to fear.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. You have the Bash brothers on Toronto and Edwin Encarnacion and Jose Bautista.
And we're not talking about hockey when we talk about the Bash brothers in this case.
No, we're not talking about hockey. We're talking about baseball. And it pains... It would pain any Reds fan or anyone who knows about Edwin Encarnacion's time at Cincinnati to hear someone say that because he did not pan out the way that Reds fans would want to hear that. But looking at the Blue Jays right now, 2012 they finished 73 and 89, finished 5th in the division. 2013, big improvement, 74 and 88.
One game.
One game. And unfortunately, when I look at what they've added and what they've lost, I don't see how they're going to get better. And that should worry Toronto Blue Jays fans. You look at a couple, they became victim of shopping spree, of impulse. Didn't work for them. So at the end of the day, I don't see them getting any better. In fact, my 2014 prediction, I think they're going to go 68-94, and I think they'll finish last in the division. I
agree with the place. My record for prediction is a little bit different. I'm going 70-92. They will at least get to 70 wins, but I agree, not going to be as good as last year. Now, let's jump over to, and just so everyone knows, we are going in order of how they finished last year. We're going to jump to the Baltimore Orioles, a team that had one of the most impressive players in last season in Chris Davis, and he'll be back. But they did lose a couple of players. The biggest one of note is their closer, Jim Johnson. He was traded to the Oakland A's, and that is a huge loss for this team. Their bullpen, whatever player that they get to replace him, is not going to be as strong without Jim Johnson. He was an anchor for this bullpen. And then you also look at Jake Arrieta. He's a starter for him. Has never been great for them, but he's been a good
He's
enough.
still a young one.
And he's been good enough that he can put up production for them.
I mean, I see Jake Arrieta and see Bud Norris as well, who is now with Baltimore. In addition for them, but Bud Norris, he's an average pitcher. He doesn't have that wow factor. He doesn't have the tools to make your eyes pop out and, hey, he's a superstar. He's one of those fringe players who I respect anyone who makes it to the majors. They have to have something to get them there. But once you get to the majors, you need to have that extra something, that desire to push you to the next level. And I don't think that it's there with either of them right now. Hasn't panned out yet. But another person that they lost is Brian Roberts, their second baseman. For a while, what I would consider probably the face of the Orioles. I've met his dad before. He's a great guy. He is a manager on Katuitt, which is a Cape League team in the summer. But Brian Roberts played for the Orioles, I believe, his whole entire career. Had a respectable career with them. And he's gone. He's gone off to New York on a lower deal. Wilson Benedict, always a solid fill-in player, has put up solid numbers. He, again, a respectable average player. Not going to wow you by any means, but he does the job that needs to get done, and he does it well.
I agree. Not easy losses for them. I guess maybe the good news for them is the fact that they hadn't seen Brian Roberts play a whole lot the last couple of years, so that loss is not as difficult for them to take. But it's a leadership thing, and I think that's one of the most understated factors in any sport is having a veteran guy in the clubhouse or the locker room or whatever sport this may be to kind of be a leader of this team. And that was I think that was Brian Roberts. But we talk about some additions here. They have made some key moves that could go kind of under the radar. They've been more recent moves that may not have been talked about enough, one of which is Ubaldo Jimenez. Now, his time in Cleveland was less than spectacular. He was not the guy that they traded for, where he was almost a Cy Young Award winner with the Colorado Rockies. But if he can go back to pitching like that, this is a team that could be there at the end of the season.
I mean, I think he's a good pickup. And the question, it's a risk. They signed him to a 4-year, $50 million deal. That's a huge risk. They are buying into him, hoping that they get the Colorado Rockies, Ubaldo Jimenez. Mm-hmm. They want to not buy the Indians one, where he didn't have a horrible career in Cleveland. He was still working things out. He had a roller coaster ride in Cleveland. He had moments towards the end where he made it shine. He showed flashes of that Colorado Ubaldo. But can he get back to form? Can he return to that form that he once was? And you see so many pitchers get in a funk where they go so far away from what they used to be, their prime, even when they possibly could still be in the prime, and they can't find that form again, and they can't regain that production.
Yeah, and with Ubaldo Jimenez, I think part of his struggle may have come with expectations. We had such high expectations, and not all guys have look like Clayton Kershaw every year. Those are one in a million. So you got to give Ubaldo Jimenez credit for the fact that he's still in the majors. He's still pitching well enough to be there, and he has the stuff to be a star pitcher again. Other big move that they made a little more recently was signing outfielder Nelson Cruz. Now, this is a guy who was suspended last year because of some PED issues. However, Nelson Cruz can be a 30 home run guy for them. He may be platooning into DH outfield all over the place because of maybe concerns with Nick Markakis' health. But if Nelson Cruz can hit like he did in Texas in a ballpark that may not be quite as big as Texas's, who knows what this team what he could put up. He could be a very, very good player for them offensively with a team that may need another guy outside of Chris Davis to hit for them, because their other really big star on this team, outside of Adam Jones, I should say, is Matt Wieters, who's a defensive all-star, but not a great hitter. He only hits probably about 250 a year. That's been what he's done in his career. So they need another guy that they can pour in and be like, hey, go hit us, go get us a couple RBIs today, and that's something that Nelson Cruz can do.
And that's the key. You touched on it. I was going to bring it up. The key with Nelson Cruz is, yeah, he's a power hitter. He can hit home runs, but he can also hit a respectable average. He's not that prototypical clubber. Hits 220, 230.
He's not Adam Dunn, is what we're saying.
No. Adam Dunn's 150. I'm saying 220. So yeah, he can still hit for power. But he can still, like you said, hey, can you go in there, give me a couple RBIs? He can do that. He can put runners in scoring position. He can do all these things. Another person to look at, though, Jamal Weeks. Coming in the Oakland trade that they sent Jim Johnson out. Brian Roberts out, Jamil Weeks in. Now, Jamil Weeks has had an up and down career so far. He's still young, though. And I feel that Baltimore, a new change of scenery could help him. Interested in seeing how, if he's able to change his approach, hitting in a smaller park in a sense, trying to not let the idea of playing in a big park like Oakland, it might change your psyche and how you approach the plate, because you're like, oh, this is a big park. I should be able to get more balls on the ground and not being caught, because there's only so much ground that the guys can cover. So now playing in a smaller park, it's like, okay, like I need to get this ball to hit ground faster. So that's how I'm going to approach the plate, how I approach my bats. So and another transaction to look out for, because after they signed Ubaldo Jimenez, there were still reports and rumors that the Baltimore Orioles were still interested and are in contact with Irvin Santana. If they can add him to the rotation,
you already have Chen in there, and the name is escaping me right now. Tillman and Chris Tillman, and I mean you're looking at potentially a really good rotation but this is again that if things tend to pan out. And I think one guy going away from the pitching that we need to look at, will he pan out once again, is Chris Davis. Can he put up these kind of monstrous numbers that he was able to put up this past year? No. 53 home runs does not coming around very often, but if he can give them high 30s, maybe even low 40s, you're looking at another great year for him, possibly an MVP award. I mean, that's what they need from him right now.
And what's scary, too, not only his numbers, but he only missed 2 games the whole season. He played in 160 games. Talk about health. That's good. So they really are, like, on the sideline saying, Davis, like, we would love you to have another season like that. Play 160 games. Any manager would love to have more players play 160 games. So, but I mean, Orioles have had some recent success. 2012, finished second in the division, 93 and 69. 2013 last year, finished tied for third with 85 and 77.
A little bit of regression, but I mean that comes when there's improvement in the rest of the division. So I just wouldn't want those numbers to be looked at maybe a little bit incorrectly.
Right, but I mean, looking at this team, talking about the things that we believe are to watch with the Baltimore Orioles, I think this team can make a run for it, but I see them 88 and 74. I feel that the losses that they have, especially with Jim Johnson, are harsh losses, and the additions have question marks associated with them.
But you are looking at some improvement with your record, 3-win improvement, possibly in contention for the playoffs even.
Yes.
I actually see them regressing a little bit more this year, going 83 and 79. I don't see these question marks pulling through for them. I just see maybe things just don't go well this year. And the thing, and I shouldn't put it like that because they're still going to have a winning record based on my projection, but they're not competing for the playoffs. And there's just they may need to make some moves at the deadline if they want to make that run. Now let's go ahead and bounce over to the team that also finished tied for third in the division last year, the New York Yankees. Chad, what an offseason they've had because I'm still trying to wrap my mind around the many additions and subtractions that this team has seen.
I mean, the first storyline, they come out in the offs after the season and they announce that they want to stay below this $189 million mark for the luxury tax purposes. I don't think that there were many people when they first heard that were like, okay, I'm really going to take this to heart. I know when I first heard that, I got my bucket of popcorn, got my pop, and I sit down on my couch and I'm like, let the show begin. Because I did not believe a word that they said when they said it. Because that's the Yankees that I've grown up seeing. They buy the people. They outbid everyone for everyone. And when you're a struggling team, when you know Father Time is knocking on your door now, because when you look at their roster, it's a fairly old team. They just lost the best closer in baseball, Mariano Rivera. In baseball history. Mariano Rivera retired. Andy Pettitte, solid starter for them, retired. Best second base, a really solid second baseman.
Possibly best second baseman in baseball. I think you could make that argument.
Best second baseman. Robinson Cano, gone. One of their starters / platoon, I guess, for catcher, Chris Stewart, gone. Curtis Granderson had a good time in New York.
He did love that short right field in New Yankee Stadium.
This is kind of mixed emotions. Some Yankees fans may be happy, might not be. Joe Chamberlain's gone.
Phil Hughes, same thing.
Phil Hughes.
Mixed reactions, I'm sure.
Red Sox fans are probably happy to see Euclid's gone, not at least not in pinstripes. So those are all their subtractions. One newest subtraction to be is Derek Jeter.
And don't forget that they won't have Alex Rodriguez. While he hasn't had a great year, last couple of years, he's still getting paid $30 million. So that is still a harsh loss for them because we know what Alex Rodriguez used to be. But I do agree we do need to look at Derek Jeter. He's been nearly the face of the Yankees for I don't even know how long, probably the last 15 years or so. When that became
and not just face the Yankees. I've seen multiple baseball articles bring up a good point that who's baseball going to find as the next face of the Major League Baseball. Because he has taken on that persona in a sense. And I didn't even think about it till I'm reading this. And I'm like, you know what? To an extent, I do see how they get that. But to go away from that, though, when you look at their additions, they spent money. It was demolished. No.
But I think one thing you have to look at is the fact that they spent a lot of money. They did not stand that cap that they kind of set for themselves. But why is it that you sign all these players to these big contracts and then say, no, Robinson Cano, we're not paying you? That becomes my big question, and I think...
And you lose out to someone like the Mariners.
The Mariners who have nothing going for them. They have nothing going for them, and you still let Robinson Cano go. It is something that I can never truly... that I will never be able to truly understand. But they're planning on moving on, and they have guys that maybe not will fill in positionally, but they have brought in guys that they believe will be able to take the reins over on kind of filling in the offensive production and including an in-house signing with an extension to Gardner.
Gardner, yeah, signing a 4-year, $53 million deal, I believe it was, and that was the latest signing. They were far off that 189 before this. You talk about Jacoby Ellsbury was the first major signing. 7 years, $153 million. Carlos Beltran, 3 years, $45 million. Brian McCann, 5 years, $85 million. Tanaka, 7 years, $155 million or $53 million. Brian Roberts, I believe it was a 1-year deal, probably for like $8 million or whatever. What worries me is not just the money that they invested in these guys, but you look at some of the ages of these guys.
It's the Alex Rodriguez thing all over again. They're going to be late 30s, almost 40 by the time their contract's up, and you're stuck paying them that money. And you look at some of these guys. Jacoby Ellsbury, for an example. He has not been able to stay healthy for the Red Sox the last couple of years.
And he's younger than a lot of their team.
Exactly.
Already.
And then Brian McCann. He spent a good portion of the last 2 years on the DL. If these guys aren't healthy and they're still having to pay, and they're going to have to pay them and Alex Rodriguez, I don't understand what this team's going to be able to do in order to try and replace these players. They can't afford to spend more money to bring in other guys and still, and I can't speak for this personally, but what are they looking at in the minor leagues that they can really be looking forward to?
I mean, here's something that really worries me. And I talked about Father Time knocking on the door of the Yankees. They know that the team's getting old. They're seeing their faces of the team retiring now. Derek Jeter, Mariano Rivera. You look at some of these people that are projected, like Athlon Sports has projected lineup of this. Jacoby Ellsbury, Brett Gardner, Carlos Beltran, Mark Teixeira, Brian McCann, Alfonso Soriano, Jeter, A-Rod, we're going to take that out, and Kelly Johnson. That's their lineup.
I don't think there's a single guy in there still in his 20s.
Right. And then you go to the bench. This is the bench. Francisco Cervelli has had hardly any experience.
Mm-hmm.
Brendan Ryan, hardly any experience.
I will give him one thing. I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think he was around for one of the St. Louis World Series. I could be wrong about that.
Eduardo Nunez, he's projected to be the replacement for Jeter. So that's big shoes to fill.
He'll never be able to hit like Jeter, but yeah, that's a different story.
Ishiro Suzuki and Vernon Wells. They have probably 7 to 10 guys who I think are probably 34 or older, which in baseball, you're usually retiring around 40. That's worrisome because I don't think their Yankees fans are prepared for what they're going to be seeing in the next couple years.
I think one thing that they've done to try and fix this age problem, it has been in the pitching. It's one thing that I will give them credit for. They've been aggressive in going after different pitchers. Last year they went for Pineda. They did trade away a very young, talented catching prospect in Jesus Montero. But if you can get Pineda to be what he was his rookie season with the Mariners, that's a big deal. And he's young. I believe he's only 22, 23. So that's dangerous for them if they have him long term. You still have CC Sabathia, which I would have to look at numbers, but I would say he's probably in the top 5 in wins over the last 5 to 6 years in all of baseball. And then Tanaka. And while I personally am not in favor of them saying, Tanaka, you're worth $155 million, then you've never pitched a game in Major League Baseball. Thankfully, I'm not a GM for the New York Yankees, so I would not be at fault here for whatever decision I made, but I don't see that as making a whole lot of sense to me, and I think that's the big question to watch with them. Just their rotation. Can they, 1, be healthy? Can they, 2, be productive? And I don't know what CC Sabathia is going to be, having lost I don't know how much weight, but I will say he looks very, very good this year. But could that affect him negatively in his pitching? If they cannot get this rotation to work well this year, they're in trouble because they just don't have the talent, in my opinion, hitting the ball to carry this team.
Right. I mean, you touched on pitching, and that's one of the things that I want to watch. Tanaka, unsure how he will transition to the Major League Baseball. Pineda hasn't had that much time with the Yankees due to health concerns. And
he sat out all of last year, yeah.
Robertson, how is he going to transition into the closer's role of a position that hasn't been taken over
since the mid-'90s?
Since the mid-'90s.
Exactly.
How is he going to take on the New York media and baseball as Mariano's replacement? Because he can't be replaced. So, at the end of the day, looking at the subtractions, additions, seeing what they've done, I don't see much in it. I see them finishing 83 and 79. And just hope that Yankees can stay above ground, stay above water, and not drown because I see it as an average season.
Well, I mean, they have regressed a little bit the last couple of years. They were 95 and 67 in 2012, first in the division last year. Finished tied for third at 85 and 77 with the Orioles. I personally see them as 86 and 76. I think they will be slightly improved, but I think you do have to look out for the fact that, like we said, this team is just plain old. Now, let's go ahead and jump ahead to the Tampa Bay Rays. They finished second in the division last year. They've been relatively quiet this offseason.
They had no major moves, but I don't feel like there were any big moves that they needed to make.
Outside of maybe signing David Price to an extension, if possible.
If possible. When I look at their subtractions, they lost Fernando Rodney. That one's going to hurt, but I feel like their minor system is their strength is in pitching. They have some good hitters, but they lost their big hitter in Will Myers. No, they gained Will Myers. Yes, they gained Will Myers. Brain fart there. But they got him in a trade. They acquired him. Their minor league system isn't hitting heavy, it's pitching. And you can see that in their rotation that they have now. A lot of homegrown prospects now.
David Price, Jeremy Hellickson, these are guys that they drafted, that they've brought up. So I definitely give them credit for that. You talk about the loss of Fernando Rodney. They did sign Heath Bell. While he hasn't been great the last couple of years.
They acquired Heath Bell.
Fair enough. While he hasn't been what we saw of him in San Diego the last couple of years, we know what he can be. He can save 35 games for them this year if that's what they ask him to do. He's got that ability. I think sometimes when you get signed to a big contract, it affects your mentality where you're like, I'm so good, I can do whatever I want. But it's like, no, you still have to produce. I think that's something that Heath Bell will fix. I'm not really that concerned about him in that regard because I think Heath Bell is an extremely talented pitcher, and he will prove that once again this year.
I think it's kind of just like Fernando Rodney. They're hoping to get the old version of that person. They're trying to get the San Diego Padres version of Heath Bell, not the Miami Marlins version, or not the Arizona Diamondbacks version, the San Diego Padres version, the dominant version of Heath Bell. They lost Jeff Neiman, starting pitcher.
He's been around for a while, but he just never really came through. And while that may be one of their biggest losses, I just don't see it as a big loss.
Right. And then when it comes to hitters, Elliott Johnson, infielder, Sam Fold, I respect the way he plays. He's a gritty player. He
reminds you of the late Ryan Freel.
He reminds me of the late Ryan Freel. And then you have Ryan Roberts. He had good outings in Arizona. Didn't really pan out as much in Tampa Bay. So that was kind of a bust on Tampa Bay's part for that deal. But when you look at the additions, Heath Bell could be a solid snag steal. In that same trade, they acquired the Reds catcher Ryan Hannigan. Struggled a lot with health issues. Only batted low 200s, 198 or something like that.
But he can be almost a 300 hitter. We've seen that in the past, and he's considered to be one of the better defensive catchers in Major League Baseball. While he's no Yadier Molina or Matt Wieters, still an above-average defender. He will keep players from being able to steal on him, which could be important in a division that features, while we may have just got done trashing him, a guy like Jacoby Ellsbury who can put up a large number of steals.
Right, and the last addition, David DeJesus, he produced. He had good production overall.
With the Cubs last year. And he's always been a decent player going back to his days in Kansas City. He will not be a star. I think we can both agree on that. He's not a star.
He's your everyday come in, I'll do my job player.
He's not a five-tool guy because he's not a power hitter, but he is I think above average at four tools. He can play defense, he can hit for average, and he can run. Mm-hmm. And if you can get that out of him, you are going to be a happy team in that regard. I think what they're still trying to do is look for someone, maybe not as a full replacement, maybe is the wrong word, but trying to take on that role that maybe B.J. Upton did in center field. And David DeJesus has the speed to be able to cover some ground out there and be productive for them. But and at the same time, maybe he's a corner outfielder because they still have Desmond Jennings. And if Desmond can hit for an average, that is a scary player right there because his speed is off the charts.
When it comes to things to watch for the Tampa Bay Rays, I found it pretty simple. It comes down to one thing, and that's how long will David Price stay in Tampa Bay? I don't think the Rays have the money to keep him in Tampa Bay. I don't see him. I mean, he seems like a nice guy, but I don't see him giving a discount by any means.
Especially not after the Tanaka deal, which I'm sure did not please him very much.
Right.
And definitely hurt the Rays in negotiations.
Right. And I see him being moved. I see him being traded. I don't see him staying in Tampa Bay throughout the season. MLB trade deadline, I would expect him to be shipped where they don't want to have a losing situation where they lose him to free agency and they get nothing from. It's hard to end relationships like this, but like all baseball players say, and a lot of athletes say, it's business. And you like to think sometimes that the players will try to find deals if they have a trade clause that helps their former team out to an extent. But they want the best situation for them and their family as well as monetarily. So
I would like to see David Price stay in Tampa because I think he's a fun guy to watch for that team. And unfortunately, while they don't get a lot of fans going out to those games, he's a reason to go watch them. Mm-hmm. And he's going to be a top 5 pitcher in the league this year, in my opinion, and will consistently be for years to come. So it will be a huge loss for them if that's a move that they have to make. But as you said, it's business. You can't go against something that's going to better your team because in the end, if he's not going to stay, he's not worth keeping around and letting him go in the end.
Exactly. And I mean, his production has how well he's done has kind of led to how successful they've been recently. You look at 2012, 90-72, finished third in division, always a tough division. 2013, 92-71, finished second. And that they played in the play-in game as well. So it was down to the wire, win or go home.
And you look at David Price, I believe it was this past season, Cy Young Award. I mean, that's how big he is to this team. We can't ignore something like that, you know?
But when I look at the Tampa Bay Rays, look at what they've done in terms of what they've lost, what they've added, I still see them as a contender in the AL East. I still see them as a threat. I see them kind of regressing a little, only by a couple games. I see them going 89-73. You know, I think they have a shot. There's things that need to. It's kind of wait and see in terms of the offense, see how well it can produce, and just go from there.
I'm in a little different boat as you. You say you see David Price leaving. In the end, I look at guys that have gotten huge deals recently for maybe some smaller markets. You know, Joey Votto is an example that comes to mind where you sign into a 10-year, $220 million deal. How can we say that may not happen with a guy like David Price? While the Rays may not be, rich and can do that easily, they will find a way to do it if that's what it takes. I think he sticks around, and I see them getting one game better than they did last year, going 93-69. And as you said, I see them competing for this division. Now we'll go to our final team, our now World Series champion, Boston Red Sox, who surprised the world with this season because you look at what happened 2 seasons ago. I mean, that was a mess. That was an absolute mess for that team.
I mean, I guess to quote Drake and what I've seen on MLB memes, they started from the bottom and now they're there. They're with the trophy.
It's a very, very valid point, Chad. Oh man, I'm not sure where to go from here. But I mean, it's just a huge turnaround to a team that, one, they got rid of a lot of their big guys in that just absolute horrid season of 2012 where they traded away Adrian Gonzalez, Carlos Beltran, Josh Beckett, and I'm missing somebody.
Crawford.
I think I said Crawford. Anyway, they traded away all these important players of this team, and a huge investment monetarily, and it paid off in the end, where they were able to attack the market and pick up some players that made a difference for this team, and you can kind of see that they seem to do that a little bit again this offseason, where they did not re-sign Jacoby Ellsbury. He's moved on to New York, and I'm sure they're hoping that this is another Johnny Damon situation where he moves to New York and gets a nice ring on his finger with that. But it's that same idea where they decided that he wasn't worth the money that they would have to they would have to pay him, and that they would rather spend their money trying to fix other areas of need on this team. One of which is it deals with the loss of Jared Saltalamacchi, another guy that they thought wouldn't be worth the re-signing. They went for AJ Pierzynski, who had not a normal successful year with Texas last year, but good enough where he was productive and kept a starting role on that team. And I think that's what they expect from him again. And then really the other big area that they attack this offseason is that bullpen.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you lose Joel Hanrahan and Andrew Bailey in the same offseason. Andrew Bailey dealt with some health issues. They go out and attack the bullpen, like you said. They bring in Burke Badenhop. Average name. He hasn't had an outstanding career. He did decent in his early career with the Florida Marlins. At that time, was the Florida Marlins. And then they go out and get Edward Mujica, who's been solid. Who did well with I know he played some with the Mets. He did well with them, and he did well with,
I believe, St. Louis. Last year. And let's not ignore the fact that he was in the World Series last year as a member of the St. Louis Cardinals in that regard. So I mean, he is a successful player for them, and I think one thing that we will see differently this year with the Boston Red Sox in their bullpen, besides bringing in new names, is the fact that Koji Uehara is their full-time closer, and if he pitches like he did in the playoffs this past year, look out. That is a scary bullpen because they can stop anybody they want.
Exactly. Another person to watch out for this season, having hopefully a full season with the Red Sox now. They acquired him last year. Jake Peavy. Struggled a little. Didn't have outstanding numbers during his stint with the Red Sox the second half of the season. Hopefully this offseason he's been able to fix whatever was possibly the cause of it. Maybe get a better chemistry with his new catchers now, and hopefully build on that and perform better this upcoming season. But subtractions, you lose Jacoby Ellsbury. Ryan Dempster's an interesting situation. I believe he's still under contract, but he let the team know that he's taking this season off due to health issues, and I believe he wanted to spend more time with his family. I believe was the other reason.
Hopefully everything is okay with that. Ryan Dempster is a guy that I personally really enjoy watching. Being a Reds fan, he's a former Red, and he's never really been an ace in the regard that we would talk about Justin Verlander or Clayton Kershaw. He's always been around and good enough to compete. He if I remember correctly, finished many seasons with a very bad Cubs team with a winning record. Mm. If you can do that, you're clearly pitching well enough that you'd be successful on a good team. That's
he's like Travis Wood.
Exactly. You take a guy that pitches well on a bad team and put him on a good team where he doesn't have to, where he's allowed to give up 3 runs in a game and he can still win it because that offense is good enough to hit for him. I mean, that's the type of guy that I've seen Ryan Dempster be. And another thing, I keep going back to it with depending on the situation, is just the leadership factor. He's an older player. He's been around for a long time. He knows the league really well. Does that affect them? I hope that he's able to stay around, maybe as like a bench coach in some regard. But I respect the fact that he is leaving to be with his family and make sure that his body's okay because you only have it for a short amount of time.
Now, I mean, one of the subtractions failed to mention, but is also a thing to watch. Um, Steven Drew left, did well with the Red Sox, had a solid season. There's still rumors that he may return and sign a deal. The rumors have said that it's between the Mets and the Red Sox. Which will he choose? That's something to watch for in the coming weeks, especially since spring training games are now starting. They've officially began, so no player wants to be too far behind. Um, and then the other one is watching the development of Bogarts.
As the replacement for Stephen Drew. I mean, and the one thing that may be affected by Stephen Drew coming back, if that's what happens, is positioning for Xander Bogaerts, where you may see him playing a little more at third base, because my understanding of the situation in Boston is that they would rather start Stephen Drew than Will Middlebrooks. And if that's the case, Bogaerts will be playing more of his time at third. But in the off days for Stephen Drew, he may be moved over to shortstop and let Will Middlebrooks play, because in the end, I think they want him to play the majority of his career at shortstop. That's his primary position. He's considered to be, I believe, the number 2 prospect in baseball. If he comes around for this team, I mean, it's obviously going to be very, very difficult to beat them.
When you look at the Red Sox, you know, the past couple of years have been
night and day, to say the least.
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. 69-93 in 2012, they finished last in the division. They're at the bottom. They went to the top in 2013, 97-65, holding the trophy, showing everyone like, hey, you thought we were done, but no, we got the trophy now. Back off. But I think they'll have a decline this season. I think their losses are too much to cover up with just a Band-Aid, with the additions that they made. I think despite Jacoby Ellsbury's health issues, his production and his fielding that he provided them is something that you can't solve overnight. I see them finishing 89-73.
I think that they will be just fine in the patching up process. Obviously not as good as last year, but I think it's very difficult to win nearly 100 games every year. So if you finish high 80s, low 90s, you've had a pretty successful season. And I mean, that's just my opinion on that. I think Jackie Bradley Jr. is going to be better than he was last year, where he didn't do almost anything. So I expect this team. I actually have the same projection in my as my final record, 89-73. Definitely competing in this division. So we'll go ahead and break down the standings that we have in our with these divisions. We've already gone through our records, but just to help you, so you're not being forced to keep track of everything. Personally, I have Toronto finishing in 5th at 70-92, Baltimore in 4th at 83-79, New York at 86-76 in 3rd. Boston will finish 89-73 in 2nd place, and then I have Tampa Bay winning the division 93-69, and I would say that both Tampa and Boston will go to the playoffs, with Boston being one of the 2 wild card teams.
Yeah, for me, what I said, going with Sam, Toronto finishing last, struggling with a couple more wins, but 68-94. New York finishing 4th. Think age will catch up to them. Finishing 4th, 83-79. Baltimore finishing 3rd, 88-74. Boston and Tampa tied for 1st, 89-73.
Now, Chad, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Which one of those is going to be the division champion, and which one of those, I should say maybe just the division champion? No definite on the going to the playoffs as a wild card. So just kind of break down those top 2 spots for me.
The division champion, I feel like if they had to have a play-in game, if it was pitted one last game, Boston, Tampa, depending on where it is, because these are 2 teams that there's not many places in the Major League Baseball, I feel, that give you a significant home field advantage as either of these 2. You've seen how it played in the Tampa Bay play-in game a couple years ago when Evan Longoria hit the home run to send him in there.
I don't believe that was a playing game, but
Last
yes,
game, but
that last game of the regular
big game.
season, one of the most fun moments that we've seen in recent baseball.
And Fenway is Fenway. That's a special moment, no matter what night it is. I think Boston. I think they just have. I feel like they have a solid closer there. I feel that if they need to, I feel that their bullpen is stronger. I feel they'll be able to find a way. They have some key bench players that I think can come in, either start, like Johnny Gomes. He comes in. He has a solid year overall for the time that he's given. So, yeah, I would pick Boston between those two.
I mean, in the end, I think we'll see an exciting game with that. So, I mean, as a baseball fan with no real rooting interest in a game like that, it would be a really fun one to watch, especially if you get two aces going up against each other in that one. I mean, that would be an absolute blast in that one. Now, Chad, let's go ahead and move over to some awards in this one, where we'll be just breaking down the two main awards of the season, MVP and Cy Young, just kind of our opinion on who will win this in the division. This would not be for overall baseball, just kind of who's the best position player in this division and who's the best pitcher in this division that's going to end up finishing with the best season. Chad, why don't you go ahead and start with your MVP award?
MVP award. To me, it came pretty simple. Will Myers, outfielder for Tampa Bay, had solid production last year, hitting 12 homers, hitting, I believe, high 280s with about 55 or so RBIs. And that's still solid production. And then take into account an off season of work, getting spring training, getting back in the move, I think he'll improve his power numbers, and with power numbers comes an increase in RBIs most likely. So I believe he can keep up with the hitting for average. So he's just the best overall player, I believe.
I'm actually in 100% agreement with you, Chad, believe it or not. I am also going to take Will Myers in this division, and I think some of that's just the fact that he was Rookie of the Year in this division in the entire league last year. He can be a productive hitter, and we've seen that. And I think the other thing that I kind of look at is the fact that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, he didn't start the year out in the majors. He played a month or two in the minor league system, and that definitely hurts your overall production where you're not going to see as strong of numbers. I do agree, though. You hit working out in the off season, a chance to really work with some guys in the majors, a guy like Evan Longoria, where he can really work with him all year round and improve his hitting. That can be a very, very dangerous player. And I just see Will Myers maybe not putting up 40 home runs this year, but I see him kind of hitting that 30 and 100 mark this season and really being the partner in crime to Evan Longoria this season, or maybe even Evan Longoria being the partner in crime to Will Myers.
I mean, we just talked about hitters, but pitching wins games too. You had the perfect games, no hitters. Sam, Cy Young, AL East, who you got?
Well, I actually have a tie going on here, and obviously this could be changed very dramatically with the talk of possible trade rumors and things like that. In the moving of David Price, because David Price is one of my guys that I see being the Cy Young for this division. The other guy being John Lester. It's the top two pitchers for the top two teams. I don't see how you can argue against that. I still think that CC Sabathia can be talked about because he is a guy that can get you 20 wins in a season, but his numbers outside of wins are just not as impressive as these other two guys, in my opinion. Chad, who do you have?
I'm going to Boston for this one. John Lester always has been dominant in Boston, and I think he continues that dominance with Boston. I think that he provides that production that every team looks for out of their number one ace pitcher. And I mean, it was simple. I think you mentioned David Price as one of your options. Again, he was in my top three, but I just truly believe that I didn't think that he was going to be there at the end of the season. Thus, he has to drop out of contention for me.
And I think one thing that Boston fans are looking forward to, going back to John Lester, is just, can he pitch like he did in the playoffs? Because if he did, it will be a runaway race, not just for maybe in this division, but maybe even for the Major League Baseball AL Cy Young Award win this year, because he was that good in the playoffs.
that's it for us today. Just wanted to thank you for joining us again for this podcast. But as we sign off, I'm just going to let you just sign off with this. I get told this by umpires every time I strike out. We're out of here. I'm out. I got to go. You all have a great day. Bye.
Well, just so everyone knows, we will be breaking down more divisions to come, going with the AL Central next, moving on to the AL West before we hit the National League. So be looking out for those. They're going to be around the corner very, very soon. For Chad Trent, I'm Sam Mullen. Thank you all for listening.